welcome. I'm Asavri Jindal and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top stories of this hour. 3 Russian MiG fighter jets reportedly violated Estonian airspace for 12 minutes. Estonia and its allies denounce the air incursion as reckless, while Russia rejects Estonia's claims. Russian forces claim to have launched a cluster of strikes on Ukrainian targets. These strikes reportedly targeted Ukrainian energy, transportation facility, ammunition depots, foreign mercenaries. Russia also gained control over 4 Ukrainian settlements. The state of Palestine is expected to participate in the UNGA's 80th session after a draft resolution was adopted by UNGA. The draft expressed regret over U.S. decision to deny visas, revoke visas of Palestinians' representatives. Amid rising tensions between U.S. and Venezuela, U.S. President Donald Trump says U.S. struck a Venezuelan vessel in Southcom's area of responsibility. Trump says the strikes have killed 3 male narco-terrorists aboard the vessel. In a latest effort to crack down on immigration, U.S. President Donald Trump signs a proclamation imposing a $100,000 fee on H-1B visa applicants. This move could deal a significant blow to the tech sector, which relies heavily on skilled workers from India and China. U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping hold a phone call, a second one this year. The leaders reportedly discussed trade and TikTok. Trump says Xi approves the TikTok deal and that leaders are likely to meet soon. As workers wrap up Jimmy Kimmel's late-night show studio, many have taken to streets to protest to the suspension of the show. The supporters, including writers, actors, rally in New York, denounced Trump's move as unconstitutional. Russia's defense ministry denied claims from Estonia that Russian fighter jets violated its airspace, stating that the MiG-31 jets flew over neutral Baltic Sea waters, staying more than 3 kilometers from Estonian islands in Venlo. Now, the Russian jets were en route from northwest Russia to Kaliningrad, and the ministry said the flight adhered to international airspace rules. Estonia, however, has accused Russia of an unprecedentedly brazen 12-minute incursion into its airspace. This has raised concerns within NATO, which has already been on edge due to Russia's actions in the region, including a recent drone breach of Polish airspace. Let's listen in to what Estonian Foreign Minister has to say.
And it was a very clear provocation. It was definitely meant like this, and that's why we are calling as well Article 4 political consultations, that if you put everything together, what has happened during the last couple of weeks, I mean as well the attacks against Poland with the 19 drones. So this is already a systematical NATO test, and that's why we asked that NATO allies, they're showing as well very clear unity amongst NATO. As well, let's discuss what can we do for the Baltic states and the eastern flank, because it is clear that Putin has started on a new level testing NATO and a new level provocation. So this is an adequate response from our side. Putin only understands the language of strength. And also, if we're talking about Russian aggression against Ukraine, so we need to increase the military support to Ukraine. We need to increase the pressure to Putin using more sanctions, more tariffs. Also, we need to decide finally to start using the Russian frozen assets. And if we're talking about his provocations against NATO, we must show that we are united, we are ready, we are able to increase our capabilities.
At the same time, U.S. President Donald Trump has expressed unease and said that he doesn't love it, calling the situation potentially a big trouble. Listening to what the US president has to say.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, sir. Russian jets entered Estonia's airspace today for 12 minutes. Do you see that as a threat to NATO?
Well, I'm going to have to look at it. They're going to be briefing me in a short while, so I'll let you know about it tonight or tomorrow.
What's your take in general? Just being
Well, I don't love it. I don't love it. I don't love it when that happens. It could be big trouble, but I'll let you know later. They're going to brief me in about an hour.
Ukrainian President Zelensky has also condemned Russia's actions as destabilizing. Meanwhile, Lithuania's Defense Minister Dovile Sakalien has stressed the need for NATO to strengthen its presence along Russia's borders in response to the escalating threats. Let's hear what the Lithuanian Defense Minister has to say.
I think that the Eastern Sentry operation needs to be full capabilities that are now owned by the alliance distributed as fast as possible along the border with Russia in Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Finland. We are currently facing a situation that we are being tested every day.
All right, so those are the developments that we are tracking as far as the war is concerned. Remember, Russia has now denied claims from Estonia that Russian fighter jets violated its airspace. Meanwhile, Estonia continues to say that there was a 12-minute violation in their airspace, is what we are learning at this point in time. Donald Trump has also, of course, chimed in, and he's called it a big trouble. So those are the developments that we are tracking at this point in time. Remember, I'm talking about, of course, Russia and it denying the claims that Estonia their airspace was violated, stating that the MiG-31 jets flew over neutral Baltic Sea waters, staying more than 3 kilometers away from Estonian island of Venlo. So those are the developments that we are tracking very closely with regards to the war. Remember, like I said, Donald Trump has also chimed in. He has called it a big trouble, but those are the developments that we are tracking very closely. My guest will be joining us very shortly to give us his perspective on what he thinks of this. But for now, those are the developments that we are tracking. In fact, joining us at this point in time is Mr. Rohan Gururatna, international affairs expert, joining us from Singapore. So thank you so much for your time speaking to us on NewsX World. From the start, so I'd like to understand from you, geographically speaking, do you think it is possible for Russia to violate Estonia's airspace?
The Russians have certainly violated the airspace, not only of Estonia, but also of other countries near Ukraine. And what we are seeing is that some of these violations are known to the Russians, but others are by error. But what is important is not to get into a conflict or a confrontation with Russia over this, because there is a much bigger issue, which is the fight between Russia and Ukraine. So Trump plans to discuss these issues with Putin in Moscow. And this is a follow-up of the meeting in Alaska. What is so important is that the conflict does not escalate between Europe and Russia, because if that happens, then there will be no resolution to the bigger conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Right, absolutely. I'd also like to understand from you, Donald Trump has called it a big trouble. With the Estonian airspace being violated, do you anticipate the war escalating and protracting further? And if so, to what extent?
Certainly it can happen, because the NATO is also very concerned and they are also militarily prepared. But I personally believe that there will be no escalation, because President Trump is determined to de-escalate this situation. And he has built a reasonably good relationship with Putin when they met in Alaska. So I believe that because these two leaders are communicating with each other, that there will be no escalation. Uh, and what is important for the European leaders is not to react to these incidences that are now taking place, whether it is in Poland, in Romania, or in Estonia, but to ensure that there is talks between Ukraine and Russia with American and European support to resolve the bigger dispute between Ukraine and Russia, which is causing this.
Right, absolutely. With that, I'd like to thank you for joining us on NewsX World, sharing your perspectives. So with us, we leave it there and shift our focus to some other news that we are tracking. Well, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a draft resolution addressing the participation of the State of Palestine during its 80th session following the United States' refusal to grant visas to several Palestinian representatives, including President Mahmoud Abbas. A wide margin adopted the resolution. 145 countries voted in favor, 5 opposed and 6 abstained. Under the newly adopted provisions, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will be permitted to address the General Assembly via pre-recorded video message during next week's general debate. The resolution has also allows, in fact, Palestinian representatives to deliver statements via video conferencing or recorded messages at other high-level meetings and UN conferences, particularly if they are unable to attend in person due to visa denials or other restrictions. The draft text explicitly expresses the Assembly's regret over the U.S. decision to deny or revoke visas for members of the Palestinian delegation. This move comes amid mounting global concerns over the situation in Gaza and the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Speaking ahead of the General Assembly's high-level week, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres described the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Take a listen.
What is the alternative? A one-state solution in which millions of Palestinians either would be expelled or would be submitted to occupation, to subjugation, to discrimination, having no rights in their own land. This is totally unacceptable in the 21st century. And what we are witnessing in Gaza is horrendous. It is the worst level of death and destruction that I've seen in my time as Secretary General, probably in my life.
As participations continue inside the General Assembly Hall, the international community is watching closely as world leaders convene in New York amid growing geopolitical tensions and calls for urgent diplomatic engagement. Joining us at this point in time is Colonel Sanjeet Sirohi, International Relations and Defense Expert, joining us from New Delhi, India. So thank you so much for your time speaking to us on NewsX. What does this essentially mean for Palestine in the long run?
Good morning, Aswari. Now, this is very unfortunate that the agreed party is not even permitted to give their point of view at the UN General Assembly, where 92 members are going to meet and discuss so many important issues which the world is facing. Now, the Americans, by denying the visas or by revoking the visas, have shown to the world that their own ultimate aim is to back Israel, irrespective of the genocide being committed by Israel in Gaza specifically and in other Palestinian territories. So I think in the long run, once we see that once this two-state solution was passed in the Assembly, where 142 members were in favor and only 10 were against it, including US and Israel, and it shows that the Palestinians are getting more support from the world. And if you see that 146 countries have already recognized the Palestinian state, and in due course of time, maybe by end of this month, UK and France, the great allies of the United States, will also recognize Palestine. So I think over a period of time, in spite of the fact that the lot of devastation has taken place in Gaza, genocide is being committed by the Israeli army. I think the Palestinian cause is getting more attention from the world. And this resolution, which was passed for 80th Assembly, where the pre-recorded videos are permitted, on other issues also, where 145 members have voted in favor of the resolution, whereas only 5 members, which includes Israel and United States, and rest 3 are very, very small countries which has no standing in the as far as the international order is concerned. So I think this move of United Nations General Assembly to permit President of Palestinian Mahmoud Abbas to give out his pre-recorded speech and allow others members also to, whenever the discussion take place on two-state solution or any other high-level meeting, I think it is a good gesture by the United Nations. And I think with this, the Palestinians will get more attention, and I think the problem will be sorted out, not maybe immediately, but in the near future. Aswari.
Right, absolutely. With that, I'd like to thank you for joining us on NewsX World, sharing your perspectives with us. Meanwhile, we leave it there and shift our focus to some other news that we are tracking. President Donald Trump announced on Friday that the U.S. military has carried out another deadly strike on a vessel in the Caribbean. The vessel, whom Trump allegedly was trafficking illicit narcotics. It was the third such strike targeting alleged drug traffickers and the second one this week. Trump said intelligence indicated the vessel was trafficking drugs and was transiting along a known narco-trafficking passage en route to poison Americans. The strike killed 3 male narco-terrorists aboard the vessel, which was in international waters, and no U.S. forces were harmed in this strike. Joining us at this point in time is Mr. Sumit Ganguly, American political scientist, joining us live. So thank you so much for your time speaking to us on NewsX World. I'd like to understand from you, is intelligence credible enough to attack a vessel and shoot people on the spot? I mean, I understand the fact that drugs are a big problem, but could it have been handled in a different way?
Of course, it could have been handled in a different way, and I'm not even sure that this is even permissible under international law, because this was a vessel on the high seas in international waters and not within the American territorial waters. So there are serious questions about the viability and the legality of the use of force in the Caribbean in this fashion.
Right, absolutely. And you know, I started by saying that this is the third such strike targeting alleged drug traffickers and the second one this week. What do you make of the entire situation, sir?
Well, this is largely a strategy on the part of the Trump administration to intimidate the government of Nicolas Maduro. Trump has no particular affection for the regime. Not that this is a particularly exemplary regime, but there are diplomatic strategies which could be adopted to deal with a regime that you dislike. And yes, there is probably some tolerance on the part of the regime towards drug smugglers and drug traffickers, but the use of this kind of kinetic force on the high seas is seriously problematic.
Right, absolutely. So with that, I'd like to thank you for joining us on NewsX World, sharing our perspectives. We leave it there and shift our focus to some other news coming our way. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump has said that he and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping approved a deal on the future of TikTok's U.S. operations during a phone call on Friday. Trump wrote on Truth Social that the call was productive and he appreciated Xi's approval of the deal, which would reportedly see TikTok's U.S. business sold to a group of U.S. investors. TikTok, which is run by Chinese firm ByteDance, was previously told it had to sell its US operations or risks being shut down. However, Trump delayed implementing the ban 4 times since it was first announced in January, and earlier this week extended the deadline again to December. Let's listen in to what Trump has to say on the TikTok deal.
I had a great call with President Xi, and as you know, he approved the TikTok deal, and we're in the process. We have some great investors, some of the biggest in the world, American investors, great people, and we look forward to getting that deal closed. We're going to have a very tight control. And look, it's an amazing thing that's been created. There's tremendous value with TikTok. And I'm a little prejudiced because I frankly did so well on it. And the United States really, I see it. I mean, people were saying, save TikTok, save TikTok. So many people. It's a big thing. And, you know, China can be very proud that they were able to get that started. And so I very much appreciate President Xi's working with us on that.
Mr. Andrew K.P. Luing, Chinese strategist, joins us from Hong Kong. So thank you so much for your time on NewsX World. I'd like to understand from you, what do you make of this TikTok deal between US and China, and who wins what?
Well, of course, it's the relationship between the United States and China is the most important and most problematic international relations in the world between the two great powers. And it's not just about TikTok only. Of course, TikTok is important, it's now the front page, but it's much more than that. It's the kind of tussle for global influence between these two great powers. And the tussle is driven not just by talk, not just by commonly accepted rules, and not just by concerns about human rights or by international law, as highlighted by the previous 2 episodes in the United Nations or on the high seas, but it's driven by power, by sheer national power. And there's a tussle between the national powers of the two countries. Now, as far as TikTok is concerned, of course, it has been very popular amongst the young people in the United States. And as President Trump said, it helped him to win back the White House. But on the other hand, TikTok is governed by the China's algorithms, the intellectual property rights. It's not just governing the TikTok platform in the United States. It's also TikTok in other countries, in Europe, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia. It's a huge market and also influence out there. And of course, the TikTok is the only English version. The original of the TikTok social media platform is in China. It's called the Red Note or the Xiaohongshu. In fact, there's been a great deal of migrants from the TikTok milieu in the United States to Red Note, using its algorithms, enabling the two people to talk to one another. And so it's a part of the tussle for influence. Now, if you look at the readouts on both sides, there are very little direct confirmation that a deal has been done. President Trump used the word approves, that presidency approves. But if you read the Chinese readout, it's all on principles, on the kind of principles that should govern the relationship between the two countries, suggesting that even though both sides want a deal, but then there's not yet a firm agreement. And particularly, it's also instructive that President Xi has confirmed his visit to Beijing, but rather referring to President Xi's intention to visit the United States at an appropriate time. That means that which side is more eager for a deal? And obviously, President Trump is is very eager for a deal because he wants to show that he is a broker for peace and either in the Middle East or on Ukraine, and he wants to win the Nobel Prize. And then the midterm elections is coming up in the United States, and he's as far as China is concerned, he's really running out of cards. But China has now got its trump card to rebuff the United States, namely its monopoly and dominance over the rare earth elements, which find its use in strategic assets like the F-35 fighters. So I think that the Chinese side seems more relaxed compared with Trump's mantra. But yes, both sides are moving towards closer because the negotiations are still continuing. And hence, President Trump even float up the possibility of further extending the deadline, suggesting that the talks are far from being over. The devil still remains in the detail.
Right, absolutely. So with that, I'd like to thank you for joining us on NewsX World, sharing your insights with us. Well, we leave it there and shift our focus to some other news that we are tracking. Well, dozens of film and television writers have taken to the streets in Manhattan protesting Disney's suspension of talk show host Jimmy Kimmel and what they call unconstitutional efforts to silence critical media voices by US President Donald Trump. After the suspension, there are several reports that suggest that Jimmy Kimmel and Disney are now working towards reaching a compromise that would allow to return to the ABC show. In fact, the host has made no public comments since the show was abruptly pulled from its regulator slot on September 17th, with Disney saying only the program would be off of its schedule indefinitely. This came after one of the biggest owners of TV stations in the US, Nexstar, said it intended to preempt airings of the program following remarks by host made in relation to Trump and in fact the slaying of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Speaking in support of Kimmel, comedian Kathy Griffin has said that it's a free speech issue. Griffin herself ended up in hot water in 2017 when she posed for a photo shoot carrying what seemed to be a severed head of President Donald Trump. Let's listen into what Katie has to say.
Jimmy pushes boundaries. All the late night hosts do because it's their job. The way that we look at comedy is the way we consume popular culture, serious moments in the culture. And so as a comedian, I do believe it's a free speech issue. And I think whether or not you agree with Jimmy's comments or think his jokes are funny, we should all be in agreement, and the Supreme Court agrees, that it is covered under the First Amendment.
Well, this is all the time that we have for now. We will continue to bring you more updates from across the world. Stay tuned.